All right, folks, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. How are folks doing? By show of hands, can I get a thumbs up, vaguely okay, or this is a struggle kind of day? Okay, I'm scanning the room. All right. And I know we are in all very, very different places, but Jade and I are very happy to be able to share the next hour and 15 minutes with you. Thank you for joining us for the USC Race and Equity Center's workshop on navigating virtual hate, responding to Zoom bombing. We'll get a chance to be interactive a little bit more into the session together, but just to get us started, I wanted to let you know that the group chat has been disabled. We're of course trying to model some of the security options that you can use for any of your teaching, any of your workshops, whether there's a co-curricular or curricular aspects. You can still use the chat feature to message everyone, not everyone, sorry, to message just me and Jade, but you will not be able to message each other. So we've shut off the group chat feature. I also want to let you know, of course, if you have any comments or questions, send them in. When I'm speaking, Jade will be monitoring the chat and vice versa. So we'll do our best to be as responsive as we can in this context. I also want to let you know that this session is being closed captioned for anyone who needs it. So if you do want that, or if you'd like to follow along visually, please click the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom application to view the captions during the session. And if you click the arrow symbol near the CC button, you'll be able to actually see the full transcript view. So you can use whatever is most useful to you, okay? All right, folks. What I'm going to do is go ahead and get started by sharing my screen. And it looks like there's a couple more folks in the waiting room. We can admit them. Awesome. All right. Let me just share this one moment. Okay, folks, just a quick show of hands. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, great. So just to get us started, we wanted to center this a little bit on being human in this difficult moment. So first of all, a huge welcome on behalf of Jade Agua and me. I'm Sumun Pendakur. We're the Chief Learning Officer and the Director of the USC Equity Institutes, respectively. We direct the Learning and Organizational Development portfolio for the USC Race and Equity Center. And we're really glad to be able to share the time with you today. We've come up through our fields of student affairs, respectively, as directors of Asian American and Pacific Islander serving centers, as directors of cultural centers, chief diversity officers. Now we're at this center together. And we wanted to offer this just as a service to everyone in our collegial community, because we know all of us are dealing with this in very, very different ways. I want to, before we even move forward, acknowledge the current moment that we are all, many of us, running between meeting after meeting, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, or any other platform you're using. At the same time, many of you are trying to homeschool. You can see a picture of us with our littlest ones there. Our youngest kids wanted in on the meeting that we had recently as we were prepping for this. So just before we actually get started with anything, we just want to invite you to take a breath. You might have just run in from a meeting. You may be heading to a meeting immediately after this. You may be heading into another family-based issue, whatever it might be. So just take a moment to pause. Take a breath with us. And exhale. At the same time that we are in the space together, we want to name that having the space to do this work in the way that we're able to do it, while many of us in our respective communities are losing their jobs and don't have healthcare, is a privilege. So we want to name all of those complexities at the same time. Going into this, we tried to build in as many security protocols as we could so that this could be focused on community-based learning as much as it could, rather than dealing with hateful trolls in our own session. So we'll try to walk you through as many of those things to role model for you what that can look like in the session. And of course, these are just things that we recommend. There's even more things that you could be doing. And we want to mention, of course, that for example, we only sent the link for the session to those who had RSVP'd. It was not open and publicly available, so things like that. But I want to mention, of course, that nothing is foolproof. So haters going to hate and trolls going to troll. And we know this from all different aspects of our work. We also want to mention that we don't work for Zoom. We are not Zoom experts, but we are using our knowledge gained through our work with the USC Equity Institutes to try to share this with you today. So a little bit of grounding in who we are and what we do and why we do it. Thanks again for joining us. Let me move us forward. Let me share a little bit of a roadmap with what we're doing today. If you are live tweeting at all, our hashtag is virtual hate. There's our handles. Feel free to stay in communication. I know there's plenty of folks who were not able to make it today. So if you want to help create the back channel for them by live tweeting, we would appreciate that. So please feel free to do that. Here's what we're going to do collectively. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a national snapshot. Let's take a look at how Zoom bombing is manifesting as a phenomenon across the nation and the various forms that it's taking. Also how it's linked to a broader trend in higher education that's around silencing and chilling effects. Then I'm going to transition it over to Jade, who will take you through preparing. So what are some key Zoom tips and tools, security features that you could be using in order to do your work more effectively and more safely? And then what happens? So if it has happened to you or if it will happen to you, what do you do in the moment? How do you best navigate that crucial and critical moment while it's actually occurring? And then I'll close this out by taking us through a little bit of a postmortem. How do we repair harm? How do we rebuild safety for any of our communities that have been affected? And then we'll take it from there. There'll be some opportunities for some group chats and things like that as best as we can in this format, of course. And we will move this forward and keep it moving, all right? So this is our roadmap. And again, if you have any comments or questions right now, please go ahead and send them through the chat room. And of course, Jade is monitoring while I'm speaking and vice versa. All right. So a little bit of a national snapshot here. I do, before beginning this section, want to offer a bit of a content warning. I'll be showing screenshots of emails and images pulled from public sources like Twitter in order to demonstrate the breadth and depth of how this problem is manifesting, but the language is graphic, so I wanted to offer that at the top. So let's first define actually what is Zoom bombing. The FBI is classifying it as a cyber attack, an attack that's intended on some levels to be disruptive and to create harm. It can take multiple forms. It can be written words across the screen. It can be images that are pushed through. It can be invective that's racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, transphobic, anything to engender harm, hate, or disruption is really the key motive here. Some folks, especially early in this, have called it party crashing, and they've referred to Zoom bombers as party crashers, which I think is a massive misnomer, right? One, most of us are not partying right now. We're trying to do our work. Number two, party crashing actually diminishes what these folks are trying to do and the impact and harm that it then creates. So we obviously recommend don't call it party crashing. Name it for what it is. It's a cyber attack, it's Zoom bombing, and it's hijacking. And the intent of hijackers generally is to draw attention to themselves and to create a culture of fear. We wanted to name that at the top. We want to check in with you if this has actually happened to you. We wanted to get a sense from all of the folks who are on today, and we have over 300, I think 350 people on right now. So Jade is going to operationalize the poll, and you'll see that pop up on your screens. And if you wouldn't mind, but take a minute, just a second to respond to that, and we will see how this is going. Can I get by a show of hands? Can you see the poll on the screen? Fantastic. We're also trying to demonstrate ways to build in interactivity, because depending on the forum or the session, some places you want to keep it very, very open. Some places you want to build in interactivity, even though it's like this, where you're not able all to talk with each other. Okay, so we've got about half of the respondents have answered so far, and it looks like fairly even split. 43% have actually experienced this or personally know someone who's experienced Zoom bombing, and 57% have not. That's a big deal to say that 43% of our current participants today either have been Zoom bombed themselves or personally know someone who has experienced it. So hang on to that. Actually, before we go forward, I'm going to take a screenshot of that because I can, just so we can see this for future reference. All right. we just wanted to get a sort of a data snapshot of who has experienced this in what way. Let's see, I don't want to stop sharing. Let's go forward. One moment, folks. Jade, can you close the poll? There we go. Fantastic. So let me take us through what is actually happening right now. And some of you on the line today may actually be from campuses or from environments that have experienced this. I want to start us off with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our good colleagues from UW-Madison said I could share what's happening over there, and their dean of students and many in their team have been personally attacked in this process. I want to emphasize, of course, that Zoom bombing is of course an act of hate, and it's linked to broader patterns of how hate, racism, white supremacy, transphobia, etc. manifest, right? It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's linked to what's happening nationally and internationally. In the case of something like this, starting with a chalking, multiple chalkings at the UW-Madison campus that said, I'm going to read it out loud, "It's from China, hashtag Chinese virus." These are, of course, words used directly by the President of the United States of America that then leads to a feeling of alienation, xenophobia, exclusion for people of Asian descent, and particularly those of Chinese descent, and leads to actual visceral harm, real harm. Not just word harm hurts, but harm like this. FBI is warning of potential surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans amid the coronavirus. Critics say rhetoric has fueled ill will. And I pulled one example for you. This was in Midland, Texas, just 2 weeks ago. 3 Asian American family members, including a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, were stabbed. The suspect indicated that he stabbed the family because he thought the family were Chinese and that they were infecting people with the coronavirus. Now, I'm giving you that context in order to share with you what our colleagues at Madison tried to do to provide support for their community members and to provide broad-based education for the rest of the UW-Madison community. So, University of Wisconsin responded to racist incidents. These are headlines I pulled. They wanted to do a Zoom town hall about the pandemic, but also what was occurring around it and how people were feeling threatened and afraid to really name it, as they should. They did the right thing. In that moment, 400 student participants were on the line. They got Zoom bombed. At the same time, Breitbart, many of you are familiar with this alt-right publication. I don't dignify it by calling it a news site. They published a piece slandering the University of Wisconsin, putting things like blaming Chinese virus on China as racist. So essentially trying to make fun of what University of Wisconsin is trying to do. And in all of this, not only did they get Zoom bombed in the middle of a 400-person town hall, sort of reifying the hate, exclusion, and fear that this moment was causing, after this, the dean of students and her team received probably some of the worst and most vicious hate mail that I've seen. I've seen quite a bit of hate mail from colleagues all across the country who've received it. And this hate mail, and she forwarded to me so I could read it, blended extreme misogyny, racism, and xenophobia, all directed against her after this Breitbart quote-unquote article. The reason I wanted to share this particular example is because the Zoom bombing is in the moment, but what it creates in terms of ripple effects of silencing and fear in a community, and then what it generates in terms of alt-right attention seeking and attention getting, and then the ripple effects and ripple waves of hate that generate from that, demonstrate how this is such a multifaceted issue. So I wanted to share that with you at the top. Now, open forums are one way in which Zoom bombing is occurring, but this is also another difficult place that it's occurring as well. We've had colleagues and that I've read about in both Canada and the United States whose PhD defenses have been Zoom bombed. So here, Sari Weber writes, "My PhD defense was Zoom bombed yesterday. Here are some suggestions for protecting your Zoom meetings. Background: trolls attempted to disrupt my defense yesterday. The interruptions were harmless at first, but they became increasingly vile and threatened me. It was scary for me and all participants." I read the story of another colleague in Canada who, during his Zoom-based PhD defense, had his 68-year-old grandmother and mother participating, and they got Zoom bombed, and graphic images were drawn on the screen, hate words were used, And he said, he wrote in describing this, that he worked so hard to get to that moment, had his family in the room there, or, you know, in the room virtually, and that he felt so ashamed and hurt about what had happened because it took that moment away from him. And that's, of course, the goal of trolls and hijackers like this, right? Is to create patterns of silencing. A couple more examples for you. This is Yeshiva University, a Jewish faith-based institution in New York City that was doing a seminar. And in the Zoom group chat, and this is one of the reasons we disabled our group chat today, people wrote things like this. I won't read these aloud, but for those of you who can read them, they say things like, shut the F up to the Jewish people, hail Hitler, and a few even worse ones. Again, it's a Jewish institution, building on patterns of anti-Semitism. And it sort of demonstrates, again, how hate is a complex issue. It is not unidimensional. I should mention that white supremacy is a hell of a drug. The person who stabbed that Asian American family in Midland, Texas, is Latino. So this form of hate can infect all people of all backgrounds. Finally, one more example, and this is what may have happened to a number of you or the colleagues you know. This is Megan Ming Francis writing about how her lecture to HBCU students, historically Black colleges and university students, was taken over, and a mob of Zoom bombers dropped the N-word, drew swastikas, and posted porn. And she writes, Zoom fixed this. The last thing I need in a pandemic is to be terrorized online. And one can imagine in that moment what it would feel like to be the professor, particularly any of us who also hold minoritized or marginalized identities, experiencing that, while our students or the people participating are also experiencing that, trying to navigate and manage that feeling in the moment while also trying to stay focused on delivering the content and not letting these people win, not letting these haters win. I should mention one of our colleagues at the center told us that Zoom went from something like 10 million users to 250 million users in less than a month. And so they are trying to meet all security needs, but they will, on some necessity, be behind. And so one of the reasons we want to do this session is about how do we protect ourselves and deal with it if and when it happens. I wanted to share us. Oh.
We just got one example in the chat box there from one of our participants. High school 9th grade bio is not immune either.
Can you say that one more time, Jade?
That high school 9th grade biology is not immune either to Zoom bombing.
Exactly, and I should mention that there is no context that is immune to Zoom bombing, right? This has happened at a YWCA community meeting, like you just said, a 9th grade bio class. It's happened at college classes, community college, everywhere. There is no place on some level that is immune if you are using technologies, right? Because technologies are porous on many levels. I wanted to share one more thing with you before I transition it over to Jade. And this is a related phenomenon on how hate mongers create a chilling effect in multiple directions. So last week, 2 right-wing provocateurs urged students to record and send them clips of their professors' online classes. The idea, according to a tweet by Charlie Kirk, the founder of the alt-right group Turning Point USA, is to, quote, document and expose the radicalism that has been infecting our schools, end quote. Similarly, Project Veritas, which has a history of undercover reporting to expose what the founder considers left-wing political bias, also tweeted an email address for students to drop recordings of their professors. Now, these organizations have targeted professors before. When they accept a report, the watch list posts a photo of the professor or the teacher and a short description of what was said that was purported to have revealed their political leanings. Any of you have heard the term doxing, in which people's personal information is revealed in a public sector. This is what these kinds of organizations are doing. Now, all of this, right, whether it's individual Zoom bombing or whether it's trying to collect data on so-called liberal professor agendas in the academy, all of this is intended to suppress learning, it's intended to suppress engagement, and particularly to create harm against minoritized communities and those who center social justice or liberatory forms of education. And I want to be very clear that all of these forms of violence and harassment are intimately linked. They are historical. What they're doing is they're simply using the tools of the modern age. And that's something for us to be able to know how to grapple with, particularly in this moment and going forward, if we are moving more and more education into distance learning models and online models, what does it look like to actually build community and build community safety in spaces that are highly porous? So I'm going to turn it over to Jade now to take us through preparing for an optimal learning environment in these times and how to respond if it happens to you. All right, folks?
Thank you, Sumi. Okay, I am swapping. Can you all see my my slides here? Yes, okay, good. I want to see some of your faces. Just rearrange a bit here. Thanks so much. Okay, so for the next portion, we're going to talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of using Zoom. There was just an update that came out last night, so some of this may be obsolete if you have already updated your Zoom, but for some of us who have not updated our Zoom yet, this is where you can navigate to. But just a general note that yes, there are updates coming out quite frequently right now. There was some chatter in the chat box about it. So make sure that you have the most up-to-date version of Zoom as often as you can, okay? And, you know, as Sumi mentioned, you know, we always want to hope for the best, but we also want to prepare for the worst. So I've kind of pulled some resources for you and organized them in such a way that I hope will be helpful as you prepare. Also, we don't work for Zoom. We mentioned this already as well. So considering other options, right? Zoombombing is the hype guys right now, but there are other ways for you to meet virtually, especially when you're considering the different size of your group. So I just, you know, did a quick search here and I pulled a little bit of information about these. Some of them are free, some of them have paid options. But Google Hangout, for example, you can have free meetings with up to 10 of your contacts. So that might be a good option for team meetings and such. Cisco WebEx for education. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with that, but if you want to you know, nod your heads or wave your hands so your colleagues can see, it seems like they had a lot of good resources for it. If you're a school teacher, if you're a school student, a parent, and they also had a portal for higher ed faculty as well. So that looked promising too. GoToMeeting is another easy option. There is a small fee I saw for an online meeting plan where you could hold a meeting for up to 150 participants. It was $12 a month. And then finally, within Zoom, there is an option to hold a webinar, right? So I'm going to go through some ways that you can kind of limit the interactivity and thus hopefully increase the safety of your meeting through using a Zoom meeting. But if you're looking at participant numbers upwards of 500 to 1,000, you might want to go ahead and consider a webinar instead, okay? And if there are any other platforms folks have been using or trying out, feel free to drop them in the chat box and I will share those out as well. Okay. So I've organized some different tips from different resources and I've laid it out as such. I'm going to go through what you can do when you're planning for your meeting, when you're actually scheduling it in your Zoom account, things to check 1 hour prior to your meeting, and then in that last 15 minutes leading up to your meeting, what you want to be mindful of as well. Okay, and see, it's in chronological order. I found that when I was kind of shuffling through the different articles and resources, it was hard to navigate because you don't know where these different things are that they're talking about. When do you put it on? If you share an account with someone, are they changing the settings, et cetera, et cetera. So I organize it in a way that hopefully, again, will be useful to you all. So in the planning, as much as possible, if you can designate someone as a co-host, for example, Sumi and I, when she is presenting, I am acting as the co-host, managing the waiting room, monitoring the participant and the chat if you decided to keep the chat box open, silencing mics as needed, and ultimately removing any people who are trying to interrupt your meeting if necessary. I know some folks who might be teaching or with their students, if there is a student that you can have volunteer to fulfill this role, it can really free up kind of your own headspace to be able to focus on your content and delivery. With so many things even just happening on, if you're using a single screen, it can be quite overwhelming just trying to manage both of those pieces and trying to keep your space secure. Okay. We also recommend that you use an RSVP process outside of Zoom. You know, we, for example, for this meeting, we used a Google form. And, you know, this may or may not be safer than using the registration process through Zoom, but it just at least adds kind of an additional step, you know, so that you're getting the folks who really want to be in the meeting, particularly if you're opening it up to the public who want to be there, and potentially weed out any intruders, right? So we ask just, you know, basic information, email, title, institution, to just kind of give us some signals that yes, these are folks that are really coming to discuss the topic at hand. And then you'll also get their information beforehand so that you can give them some information too, to help you kind of keep the environment safe, which is encouraging them to arrive early. Today I couldn't do it because there were too many participants, but if you're looking at 30 to 50 people and you have an RSVP list, you know, build in that extra time beforehand, just like you would for an in-person event, right? And you have a registration table and you're checking people in, right? How can we kind of utilize some of those tools in this online format? You can also let folks, as we did, that our meeting is now locked. So unfortunately, if people get dropped, you won't be able to get back in. But this is just another security measure. We are recording it, so the video will be provided as well as the transcript and the slides. And then also letting folks know that the session will be recorded if you are planning to record it.
Jade, we had a couple colleagues offer some suggestions here as well.
Sure, let's read them out.
So we have Morgan recommending another good option for small meetings of 4 people or less is, where did it go? Whereby.com, WHEREBY.com, seems to have much better encryption and security, she writes. And then we also have patients writing in to say that my campus also uses Microsoft Teams and Ring Central, which is a very similar setup to Zoom. So a couple of other recommendations as well.
Great, thank you, Sumi. And I also see that at UCSC, one of our friends, Jeremy, has shared that they've actually been hiring student event staff as moderators to function as co-hosts. So that's an excellent option too, if you have the resources to be able to do that. Thank you so much. And I'm thinking now, you know, as we're getting these great comments, and that's definitely one reason we didn't want to totally limit the interaction for this meeting, is we wanted to share best practices, right? So I will, you know, we'll share out loud here as much as possible, but also afterward, I'll go ahead and go through the chat box and kind of pull these together for us all so that we can have them moving forward. Okay, all right, great. So back to, you know, that was kind of the planning piece, right? Now this is for scheduling. So when you're actually, you know, you're opening up the calendar function within Zoom and you're setting up the meeting. Some of the things you might want to consider is requiring a password. I did that for this meeting, and when Sumi logged in, it didn't even ask her for a password. I'm curious, did folks have to enter the password to get into this meeting? I'm seeing nope. Right? So you just never know what is going on. Yeah, lots of no's. So I did, it didn't work. Don't know why. Oh, some people said yes. Okay, well. Also muting participants on entry, enabling the waiting room, of course. I think those two have been automated as the default setting by Zoom. And then ultimately to not share the Zoom links publicly anymore, right? And this is where, again, we recommend that you have some kind of RSVP process if you can. Okay, so I'm gonna go through some screenshots, and as I mentioned, if you've already updated, it looks different already. So I updated right before this meeting, and when I navigate to my menu bar within Zoom, I have a security button now, and all of these options are very neatly and conveniently in one spot, which was not true yesterday morning when we were finalizing this. So I'm still gonna go through the slides so you can see, in case you're not updated yet either. So this is, again, for the scheduling. There it is, the meeting password. This was the password for this meeting that did not get asked all across the board. And then in the bottom red box, you can see that mute participants upon entry and enabling the waiting room are also selected. Okay. Yes, I got a note that also recommends to use a random link and not your personal meeting ID, right? Because we don't want that floating around out there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, in 1 hour prior, so the reason I kind of put this up closer to the meeting is especially if you're using shared accounts. And also I feel like when you log in and out of Zoom, I'm not sure what gets kind of reset or not. So I just recommend, like, before you're opening up the meeting, if you can, go in and check your additional settings. And again, I'm going to go through the screenshots of what this looks like one by one. So I won't go through it here, but I'll show you as we see the picture in front of us. So this is, you know, when you're in an internet browser and in your Zoom portal, you can navigate on the left and under meetings, and you'll see here highlighted in blue, these are the in-meeting basic kind of options. So you can turn the file transfer off. This may be obvious for folks, but you can see the button is to the right of the option and it is gray and to the left, and that's the off setting, right? So you can see turning the file transfer off, so that limits anyone trying to share stuff with you know, any images that might not be appropriate with others or with everyone. Turning that off. Also, here's what it looks like to control your screen sharing so that only the host can share. And when you give co-host privileges, that's also afforded to the co-host as well. Sumi and I just did a handoff with the screen share there. And that's on the top, and you can see that's toggled on. And then turning off the annotation, the whiteboard, and the remote control options as well. I'm not even sure what remote control is. I've never tried to use it, but it sounds like something I don't want open. So I'm gonna turn that off as well. And again, going in and checking this all in an hour leading up. Okay. And then also turning off the option of allowing participants to rename themselves. So we just thought, you know, this might be helpful, especially if you are checking against an RSVP list, but also if someone's trying to sneak in and then change their name constantly so that you can't remove them, that might be a good option to turn off as well.
So Jade, if I could interrupt for a moment. For
Sure.
example, we removed 3 people from our waiting room who showed up as phone, and we had of course been very specific that people had to turn their video on for today's session. They showed up as phone users with no name, and immediately when one of them showed up, a note popped up for us that said, screen sharing has been disabled for participants. We're like, yeah, of course it has been. They were trying to already share who knows what right at the top at like 9:59 a.m. So just a heads up.
I also have a couple of good notes in the chat here that you can set these as your default in your account settings. So if you are the only owner of your account, that you can do that. Also, an important question here. What if you need to use all of these features for the functioning of your program? We have collaborative learning programs that depend upon allowing participants to be able to participate in these ways. Absolutely, we understand. Hoping that those programs are limited in number, right? So if we're doing more interactive programs, then are we looking at 50 people or less? And is that a situation where we can verify with an RSVP list? Or if you're at an institution, is there a way to authenticate their institutional email addresses and have them only be able to participate using those, is what we would recommend for that. But yeah, I know at some point it's like, oh, well, I might as well do a webinar or just pre-record this and post it somewhere, right? We like to have that interactive component as much as possible as well. Sometimes we ask people about their emails or student ID numbers at the top of the meeting. Okay, so like a little kind of security check question, have them drop it in the chat. If it's something they don't know, it might be obvious and you might be able to remove that person up top. Thank you. Great comments in here. So thank you. Next, moving on. In the 15 minutes prior to your meeting. So this is logging on early. And again, this is where it might be very different because now I see that a lot of these options are under the security button, but I'll go through and show them to you anyway, just in case. I like to have my setup so you know, you have the Zoom, and then I like to open up the participant box so that it comes up on the top right-hand corner, as you see here. And then I also like to open up the chat box so that it appears in the bottom right-hand corner, as you see there as well. And so right here, what's highlighted in red is how you can verify that the share screen is on one participant only and that it's only for the host. When you click advanced settings, this extra box comes up so that it's only for the host. And then for this next one here is where on the chat box, when you click on the kind of extra 3-dot button there, an option for participants can chat with no one. You could totally shut it off. they can send messages to you, which is what we're doing right now, right? Or if you want to keep it open to everyone publicly, or everyone publicly and privately. And privately, of course, is when, you know, maybe one participant wants to send a message to another participant, whether or not you want to let that be enabled or not. Okay. And then we have locking the meeting. So we just locked the meeting at about 10:10, 10:12. And this is where that option is. It's under the participant box, under the More button. This is where you can also verify that your participants will be muted on entry, where you do not want to allow participants to unmute themselves, right? That remains a host and co-host privilege, and then lock the meeting ultimately. Okay. Let's see. Oh, wow. I just saw someone shared that they were informed 2 districts in the state of New Jersey have outlawed Zoom for school use. So they've been using it for 3 weeks, but now they're moving into something else. So like I said, there are other options. You know, part of, I think that even using the word Zoom bomb, right, is like we're fueling it in a way, right? It's a thing now, and it's important to name it, but it's also because of the number of users on it, why it's so popular. Okay. Let's see here are the resources that I kind of pulled all of these together from. I definitely want to make some time now if anyone wants to drop other resources into the chat. These were just clear and straightforward. The USC put up one from the ADL, and then of course Zoom themselves. They initially, I think, on their blog had something about party crashers, and then they changed it to keeping uninvited guests out of your Zoom event. So these are some good options. Again, don't worry about, you know, getting the URL down right now, because we are going to share these slides. So locking the meeting means that no one else can join it after it has started. And in other words, no participant can invite someone ad hoc during the meeting, right? Yeah, unfortunately, that's right. So it's kind of like if we were in an actual room and there was a lock on the door, we're locking it and there's no ins and outs. In this case, there are outs, but you can't come back in. And it also just affords you a little bit of space, right, to not have to be constantly managing the waiting room, because that can be distracting, especially if you're not able to have another person co-host with you. Someone dropped in a New York Times article link there that says Zoom security tips. What if students come in and do not turn on their cameras? How can I manage that requirement? You know, we went back and forth about the camera. On one hand, you know, it gives us kind of a sense of accountability with our participants, right? But if there is a situation where maybe it's safer for them to have their camera off if they're not in a space that they want other people to see. So I think that's going to be a case-by-case basis. That's not a hard and fast recommendation, I would say. Does the waiting room still function when the room is locked? I don't think so. I'm not sure. I have had it locked, and I have not had any messages right now telling me that people are waiting in the waiting room. If someone's internet connection drops, they cannot get back in, unfortunately. And again, for bigger meetings, right? We're thinking like 500 plus, just to kind of alleviate the management of some of those pieces. But if you're working with 100 or less, you might be able to be more lenient on some of those recommendations. Okay, so we could do all of these things and take all of these precautions, which are changing by the day, and still we might get Zoom bombed, right? That's the reality of it. What do we do when it actually happens, right? And we just put together, you know, a quick guide that, again, hopefully will be helpful, and we'll open it up after this portion for y'all's input as well, especially for our folks who have actually experienced this, how you were able to manage it in the moment, okay? So again, if you're able to have a presenter and a co-host, for the presenter, you know, number one, remembering to stay calm. It may seem really basic, but imagine the difference between the impact that the interruption might have for your participants or for your students if you are remaining calm and setting a tone versus getting flustered and not knowing what to do, right? that kind of panic can kind of be contagious, and then everyone can start panicking. But instead, if you can stay calm, you can acknowledge that it's happening, right? You can say something like, it appears that someone is attempting to interrupt our meeting while we are managing the issue on our end. Please go ahead and stop your video feeds, right? And at this point, you know, we are thinking about what are the ways we can kind of disempower this intruder coming in to interrupt our space, right? We're not going to participate. We're going to turn off our videos. And so that's one measure that we recommend. And then also to continue, right? To continue with the content, which in the moment might seem counterintuitive, but ultimately, Sumi said earlier that they're trying to silence us, right? And we don't want that to happen. And that's particularly for the hate intruders, and not just general kind of Zoom bombing, but especially for ones that are directed at certain topics that you might be holding. So continuing and knowing that it's going to be recorded, you can share the recording afterward, and you want to make sure that you're able to get all your content on there, and that hopefully that will be a resource for participants afterward to go back and review it, you know, without the interruption in live time. And then for the co-host,
I wanted to mention very quickly, we had a good comment from our colleague Judy.
Sure.
You know, about this point about you know, remaining calm, and we fully acknowledge that that is taxing in the moment. But she wrote here that the Zoom bombers are videotaping reactions and posting them on social media.
Exactly.
They are desperate to get attention. They are desperate to create fear and to watch that fear. And in saying it crudely, they get off on it. And I'm not trying to do that. So just wanted to put that there.
Thank you. That's an excellent comment. Thank you for sharing that. It's very poignant. Okay, and then for the co-hosts, some easy steps, you know, while your presenter is kind of managing the front end of the house, that on the back end, recommend utilizing the speaker view to be able to identify who is, you know, who has been able to override the mic feature, if that's what's happened. That's something that we've heard has happened, because when you're on speaker view, that video feed becomes large on your screen, so it's easier to get that person's name and then go to the participant box and ultimately remove that person. Okay. We ask participants to stop videos. Does it also stop the mic? So no, the mic and the video are separate functions, but we recommend that you keep the mics muted from your end, so hopefully they're already off. But yes, if you want to, you can also reiterate, please make sure that for now, keep your videos off and go ahead and make sure your mics are muted as well. I think is a good measure.
It's also a tool. One of our colleagues here asked, if you ask people to turn off their screen, they will still see the Zoom bombing content there, right? They just won't see us. And that, from my understanding, that is correct. The folks doing the Zoom bombing won't get to see you, won't get to see reactions. But also, number two, it's also a way to identify those who still have video on who are attempting to create harm. It's sometimes a quicker way to be able to go in and remove them. So sort of multifaceted. And Jade, we have a question here from Jane, who's asking, do you have ideas in that moment that you're going to build on right now for helping instill a sense of safety for the participants?
This is so good. It's such a great question. And I think it's something that we can lay from the outset of, if this is a class that you're continuing, right, with something like community agreements and borrowing ideas from creating a brave space, right, that we can't guarantee a safe space, right? We just can't do that. And that was true before this, right? So how are we giving folks kind of the warning, but also the tools and information about what to do in the moment when it happens? I also have a couple of good questions here about, here's a couple. Do you advise stopping the recording when you have the interruption so that it's not included, or would it be important to include? I would say, I think it depends. That's a great question. I think if it seems like it's going on and on and on, and I've heard also of accounts where it seems like there are multiple people, then I would think that is a good recommendation to be able to stop it. Or the or is here, or do you want to keep it so that you can report the bias situation to your campus administration? I think, again, case by case basis, ultimately, it's not so much that you wouldn't want it recorded, it'd be more that you didn't want your participants or your students to see it, right? So it might be asking them to turn off their screens or minimize the screen until they hear further instruction, right? So that they're not seeing it. That might be an option. I also have a really important comment. What happens if they take over so completely you cannot remove them? This is when it happened to my group. 8 people came on all at once and took complete control of the session. I think that there are some, you know, depending, if you know all of the participants in there, this might be a situation where you need to just end the meeting, right? Because again, it's this case of, although in that moment, I wonder if folks turning off their video feeds might have helped, might have been able to help manage that moment. But if you need to end the meeting, we need to end the meeting, right? Sometimes it's one of those in the moment calls. If you feel like there is more harm being done than I am able to manage in this moment, then that's the right call for you at that time, right? And then it becomes more important on the latter half after the fact, right? And that's what Sumi is going to get into in terms of repairing the harm, right? Let's see, make sure that I hit all my notes for this slide. If there are any other recommendations or things that folks did when this moment happened to you, if you could drop those in the chat box, that would be great.
Can I mention we have a couple of questions and comments, and so if people want to write back their feedback that we can share out loud with everyone, we've got a couple of thoughts here. Number one, Jane also shares that in the participants box, a green box shows up for anyone who's actually sharing a screen, so you can it's helpful to know who is sharing stuff, and you can always isolate them as necessary. We've got a question from Frankie. If we're recording and a Zoom bomb takes place, where do we report it to? Do we send the evidence to the police? And one of our recommendations, of course, is that the first place you start is with your bias protocol program on your own campus. If you have a bias response team or a bias incident reporting, to navigate the steps there, but to keep the recording, to have as much information as you can store about the date, time, location, what actually occurred in the moment. And again, if people have additional recommendations, please type them in the chat box so I can speak them out. We have a great question here from Janie. Do you have any recommendations or best practices on how to preserve or document information to be handed off to campus police or student conduct? And then one more here. Is there a way to edit the recording so that when students go back to watch the recording, they won't need to relive that traumatizing moment? Jade, do you want to handle any of those? And then we can see if folks are going to send in any answers to the chat.
Sure. So for that last question, yes, there is a way to edit it. You would just, it might end up being separate files for you to remove the gap, but there is a function within Zoom to be able to do that. Lots of comments coming in, so this is great. This is a great comment from Monique. Keep in mind that one's ability to stay calm in the moment does not mean that that individual has not been harmed or traumatized by the incident. Absolutely, 100% agree. Sumi's going to talk about that as well, and to seek support if needed, which I imagine might be the reason some folks came today, right? And one of the needs that Sumi and I, in putting this together, wanted to be able to meet. So thank you for that. Thank you for naming that.
And we've got patients here suggesting that you also report the intrusion and the hijacking to your IT folks. So if there's anything that your IT folks on your campus can do in terms of enhancing security protocols from their end, you know, they're working frantically right now. They can also be fully aware of how this is manifesting.
There's also a question here about video, and I do not believe that participants have the ability to record the session, at least through Zoom. Now, if there's some kind of other application they have on their computer that they're able to do that, I don't think that you can really control that part. There's some good information here also about the Orange County OC Human Relations. They're asking for folks to register these as hate incidents, and there is a link there that I will provide to you all as well. Thank you, Connie, for that. And Sean shared that you can also edit the video by downloading it and trimming it in QuickTime, which is probably a better way to do it than in Zoom, because it's a little limited in Zoom.
Just to double back before we move forward on the recommendations or best practices on how to preserve or document information. So you have the video link always with every Zoom session, and almost all of these platforms you can record. This is, for example, being currently recorded so we can share it later. So you have the actual link. You can also download the chat. So if your chat forum is bombed itself, like Yeshiva University, you can download the entire transcript of the chat, and it has all of the information in there. And then obviously, I think providing the link, the chat, any images that you're able to screenshot, all of that is helpful for anybody who's trying to do any kind of investigation.
Right.
Really excellent questions and comments, folks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for helping us make this more interactive. I'm gonna hand it over to Sumi. The last note I would say is that if you are able to co-host with someone, to make sure that you have kind of an external to Zoom form of communication where you can directly get in touch with one another. So I got my chat open to Sumi right now on my text messages on my cell phone. So that's helpful as well.
And one more comment here, I oversee conduct on my campus and highly recommend that folks set up digital communication expectations for their areas, events, and departments. So if something has to be referred to conduct, we have something to refer to. Patients, that's actually an excellent segue into this next section, which is about managing and repairing harm. So thank you for that. And someone also mentions, John mentions that the host can download the attendee report on Zoom, which will include the names and email addresses of all participants. This is actually one of the reasons we wanted to ask for as much feedback from you as possible, because there's so much community-based knowledge that we can draw from, and we are all learners in this moment as we try to ramp up our skills.
This is a great question. Do you recommend establishing a just-in-case protocol with your group at the top? Yes. So if you feel like, for example, you want to do have folks turn off their video feeds, yes, let them know that up top. That listen, if we get interrupted, I will let you all know this is what we want to do. I also have an important question here about how you turn on the closed caption feature, and it should be a little CC caption button on your menu bar in Zoom.
At the very bottom of the screen, it says CC and closed caption underneath. You just click that. All right. Now, Jade, I would reshare my screen now, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Mm-hmm. All right. Let me move us forward here, folks. Oops, there we go. Okay. And I want to be able to see you. So let's just see. Okay, here's what it is. One moment. Okay, great. And I want to mention that a colleague has sent a really important point about socioeconomic class status information, as well as the possibility of being dead named using institutional names. So let us parking lot that for a moment, because I do want to return to that in a few seconds. Okay. All right, folks. So what we've done so far is laid out a national landscape for what's occurring. Taken a brief look at that. We've taken a look at some basic security tips, tools, protocols, how you can manage then in the moment if this actually occurs to you. And what we want to talk a little bit about now is, if this has happened, and it's happening again to 43% of you or people that you know, like you said, what do you do in the moment and post? Jade talked a little bit about that, but I want to continue building on that. All right, so for a non-course event, I pulled two things for you here. You can, and some of the folks addressed this in the last discussion, generating a report post-webinar, or if it's a Zoom event where you've asked people to register via Zoom, you can download the report with full contact information. And again, that's a place to send it to your IT, to your conduct office, to your bias incident reporting team, anybody else on campus who needs to have that information. That's, of course, I would say the logistical pieces of that. But I want to build on the logistics to talk about how do we actually deal with the harm that's been caused. So downloading the chat, number one, to address specific comments. So if your chat was what got bombed, like at Yeshiva University, to directly name the harm that's caused to specific communities. Most of us who are on any kind of educational institution, whenever there's been a campus climate incident, oftentimes leaders will put out a statement. And some of those statements are really, really powerful and meaningful. And often, many of those statements are extremely generic, like, this goes against our values. We are sad this happened. That's not the kind of statement we're talking about here, folks. We want to be able to name specifically what's happened, to say this was anti-Black racism, this was anti-Semitism, this was xenophobia targeting Chinese communities, this was transphobic. Whatever it is, to actually name the community that has been harmed through the set of actions in this process, number one. To then also acknowledge that what happened was wrong, scary, and unacceptable. That can happen in the moment, obviously, as you calmly name it for what it is, but then also post. So writing to all of the attendees, writing to your class, holding a follow-up session that you can do with them just as a class to kind of heal a little bit and to dialogue and discuss, to let them have a space to actually talk through their feelings about what occurred, feelings that we ourselves might be sharing too, right? And then, of course, for those of us in the institutional context, to tie what occurred to campus climate overall and to stated institutional values, if you happen to have stated institutional values. Some institutions are still working on that. So using this both as an opportunity to deal with the concrete harm that's been done, who has actually been affected by it, what forms of silencing this creates, what ripple effect it creates, and then to be able to also hold a post-event to have people, to allow people to be in a space together that is healing oriented, and to name that this was scary, it was awful, you hated it, whatever the feelings were. Now, post-event, for example, if you're going to have a follow-up event, if there are any concrete actions you were able to take as the instructor or as the course leader, as the professor, the teacher, the facilitator, if you were able to say, we were able to identify the IP addresses of those who did this, and we were able to provide those IP addresses to X, Y, and Z for this X, Y, and Z follow-up, that's important for people to know where the information goes, right? Any of us, for something terrible has happened to, so many times those just end up sitting in a vacuum and nobody does anything with them. So to be able to communicate to people if there's something concrete you're able to do. Now, of course, much of the time, these folks evaporate into thin air. And so we can't necessarily address them, but we can, again, try to mitigate harm and create more healing for whoever is in our community. If your institution has a bias reporting protocol, report this, because data matters, right? We need to be able to document for all of our campuses, because again, if the data is then tied to resources, allocation of extra IT security measures, that all costs money. And if your institution is like pretty much every other institution in the country right now, belt tightening is occurring. So we need to be able to articulate where we need to allocate resources to using these forms of data.
Sumi, we've got a great comment in the chat. That people experience the harm differently. So that's something important to remember, and that leaders may only see X type of harm because of who they are, and yet in the incident, there were other dimensions of harm. Basically, it's usually intersectional, and don't erase some kinds of harm inadvertently. Ask people who were there what they experienced before summarizing it.
That's exactly right. That's beautiful. I love that. And I love that that is drawing from the desires of the community to have something named for themselves as to how they're experiencing it, and also blending in what we're seeing and what we're able to name, right? Not backing away from it, but bringing more people into the discourse and into the dialogue about how harm has occurred across multiple axes of identity, multiple axes of community. Thanks for sharing that, Jade. Now, these are for non-course events and related to course as well, but if in an academic or a co-curricular course setting, there's even more you can do because you have all of your own students' information, right? It's not an open event. You have the students, the 20 students, the 50 students, or the 250 students, whatever it is, you have all of their information. So scheduling follow-up discussions, ensuring safety protocols are in place. I heard, well, Jade and I both heard from a couple folks who said their students, after getting Zoom bombed, were then too nervous to go back into the space. And I want to speak very honestly, just as an individual, I really grapple with that because I fully acknowledge the varying and multiple levels of fear and alienation that these kinds of things cause. And at the same time, I don't want to give in. I don't want any of our communities to give in and to be pushed to silence and to the margins, which is exactly what these people want. So, again, it becomes incumbent upon the institution and us as course leaders or facilitators or anybody else to create as many safety protocols as we can. And I'm not saying that's an easy job by any stretch of the imagination, but saying that we won't have people in a shared space anymore, even through these virtual platforms, the more and more separated we get, that really is them winning. And that's been the goal of hateful individuals for time eternal, right? Which is to separate people and to silence people, particularly those who are minoritized and marginalized along multiple axes. I wanted to ask for if there's anything else here. I'm not seeing all of the chat notes, Jade. I think they're mostly coming to you. So if there's anything else that's coming in What are some other community-based ideas, particularly in academic or co-curricular course settings, that you've either done or you've seen colleagues do or that you'd recommend doing to heal and to engage in positive follow-up post a hateful event like this?
Got some good comments here, Sumi. One is encouraging folks to also consider handling civility issues with students. We may get so consumed with looking for outside intruders, but having a plan for handling students and how the class will recover when they meet again for the next class.
That is wonderful.
And it's fantastic that UW-Madison was able to take such a strong stance, but it can be intimidating to take that stance when you see how much hate mail they received, right? How can institutions be encouraged to still take these strong stances regardless of the negative feedback that might be received? Good question.
Yeah, there was hundreds of emails that were just pretty horrific in language, tone, meaning, everything. But right, that this piece, what you're really speaking to is that it does take courage, continuous courage to speak out and to continue to offer forums and to do this always with the rationale at the center, which is this is about creating spaces for people to know that they are welcome, that they're included, that they belong, that they matter. And that's hard. That's hard work. I'll leave it at that. Jade, other comments or thoughts?
Yeah, important question, and a couple of good comments here. Question, how do we best help student-led Zoom environments, such as those from student orgs or student government? Do we take away the autonomy of them being able to create and manage their own spaces and have staff manage it? Do we provide education and just hope they take our advice? What other avenues are there?
I'd love folks to actually respond to that question in the chat, and maybe Jade could read some of those. On the top, I think this is a phenomenal opportunity for us to do similar things like this, like we're doing for each other right now, for our students to equip them with the tools and resources to be autonomous leaders in all the spaces they're in. Let's be honest, more of our students are better at using technology than we are. I'll speak for myself. That's the truth right there. But helping them to navigate the current moment and to develop facility with the security protocol so they can continue to engage in their work in meaningful ways, I think is really important. This is part of the asset development of all of our students.
Some good comments here. Incorporating maybe some restorative justice components if it involves students, introducing them to any advocate groups on campus so that they can get involved to create change. A really sad note, high schools don't want to touch this, and we are asking teachers to not have Zoom or online classes. Everyone is scrambling. I think we can encourage our students to reflect on incidents and extra credit or other types of assignments as a way to support their processing of the material and experience. Allowing space maybe at the beginning of the next class to discuss feelings surrounding the incident. Training. Yeah.
And this is
creating protocol and procedures.
I think this is key for us, right? Offering the space for people to come together, even through a virtual platform, to process through what has occurred rather than pretending like it didn't happen, and that we can go on with business as usual. And that's about this entire moment, right? None of this is normal. Well, it is very normal in the ways white supremacy operates, but also abnormal in some very specific ways. We've got a colleague here, and I'm going to move into this in the section, who says, we're also trying to prepare very clear community guidelines as part of invitations to online events, as well as devoting a part of the program introduction every time to cover expectations for the way we engage. So that is actually a specific, excellent way for me to move into this, which is about thinking through future security needs. In this moment, we are being asked to move at lightning pace to address things that not all of us are ready to address, that we don't have the capacity to, that our institutions may not want us to, as our high school teacher colleague just shared. But here are a few tools I pulled from you from a tech org, and what they did is they wrote about this in the sense of, if we don't want to move towards policing and punishment, how do we set up a community-based forum so that we've thought through these things in advance? And some of these, for those of you, particularly in student and campus activities, who have been on safety teams before, some of these are going to be familiar to you, but let me share them out with you. So for the safety team to actually have, whether it's students or TAs or Jade and I, for example, co-hosting, someone focused on safety and security throughout the event. So for example, while Jade has been speaking, I've been monitoring to make sure that no one is entering the space in order to remove them, and she's been doing the same. Now, the folks on the safety team shouldn't also be facilitating, moderating, speaking, performing, or presenting, right? They can pay full attention to what they're supposed to be doing. Couple points here. And this goes to our colleague at UCSD who just shared about community guidelines. What's allowed, what's expected or tolerated from attendees during the event, and what isn't? So will the community be actively participating or only watching and listening? Should attendees be able to share their screens or files, enable their video, or unmute themselves with or without permission from event hosts? Can attendees ask questions at any time or only during designated times? And you've seen here, we've really tried to sort of role model this as much as possible to say, these are the times in which you'll be able to afford feedback, we will speak it out, trying to do this as best as we can in this Brave New World moment. How much debate and crosstalk is appropriate in the space? Now, if you have 20 people, it's very different than in this session today where there's approximately 300 people, right, in terms of debate, the space for debate and crosstalk. But figuring out those goals and needs in advance so that you can set this up before. I hate that we have to think about this, but we have to think about this. What are probable threats to the event and the community gathered for it? So who will be there? What axes of their identity or what communities may be under threat? Who may have access to the space, and how likely is it that those threats will occur is something important to communicate. Different events and different communities will face different risks based on who is participating, what the topic matter is, whether the event is public or private, and other factors. So having, in terms of the safety team, a good idea of what to expect, including what's happened during past real life and virtual events and any new special or timely concerns. It's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of share that national snapshot right at the top to say, this is what's occurring, how do we actually prepare mentally and logistically for this? And then finally, how does the community or the organization wish to respond to threats that materialize during the event, right? You deal with it during and then after. So if something happens, you have to be able to answer for yourself. Should disruptive individuals be kicked out of the event immediately or muted and approached in an attempted de-escalation? So Jade, you brought up one of our colleagues who said, how do we deal with, for example, students in the class who may end up trying to just be disruptive for a variety of reasons, not necessarily through hateful Zoom bombing reasons, but because they decide they want to take over class discussion that day because they're protesting something. Then you have to figure out what is your protocol for dealing with that. Do you mute them and take them to the side in the Zoom room or in the chat room in order to dialogue with them in an attempt to de-escalate, reduce harm, and still keep them as part of the community? That has to be done on an as-needed basis. Does the appropriate approach depend on who's doing the disrupting or the nature of the disruption? Things to communicate and to consider before your session happens. And then really finally, the safety team has to be trained in advance, and this is about students who asked that question earlier, or about us on both the technical and non-technical skills needed to respond to the security needs for the event. And that security needs that it's not only about the security of the event, but really about the psychological safety of those participating. Excuse me. We are very, very close to the end of our time, but our skills, developing the fluidity and agility to spot, mute, turn off video, kick out crashers and disruptors, how to de-escalate with participants who are disrupting the event in ways that don't merit immediate expulsion. All of that, we are on the learning curve with all of this. Some of you are somewhere along here, some of you are here, some of you are over here. That's okay. This whole point is about being a part of a community of learners. I wanted to see, Jade, if anything else has come into you before I move towards closing us for the time that we have today.
Just one note that Zoom just emailed an overview of recent updates that covered much of what we did today. And some good stuff here, but like I said, I will compile and send out.
Right. And you know, as Jade mentioned at the top, they sent that out. The update came last night. Of course, we designed this workshop before that. Not everyone has the update yet. So hopefully this has been helpful. I wanted to double back to something I put in the parking lot earlier, our colleague who said, just a couple thoughts to share to complicate this. Requiring video sharing can require disclosing SES related information as well if somebody is in a home environment or outside environment that they're not comfortable sharing. I will mention that I know that lots of students are using Zoom backgrounds and backdrops. I see Augie doing that right now, for example, in order to cover whatever is in the background that they don't want to share for a variety of reasons, whether it's about class, whether it's about culture, whether it's about anything else. So allowing students to be able to do that and encouraging them, in fact, to do that it's for fun and also for self-protection is useful. I've got a recommendation here that we'd all have to grapple with. Recommend allowing people to change their names, especially for trans and non-binary folks using their institutional accounts, as they might be getting dead named. So if your institution does not allow people to change their names as they register, this is something to grapple with and consider for this. So I want to, as we get to the last 2 minutes of our time together, Jade and I really want to mention this, and I feel like we've tried to do this throughout, but we mentioned that if you are the facilitator, teacher, lecturer, professor leading a session, we've recommended that you keep calm to be able to role model that these people will not be able to get the best of us, but that actually takes spiritual and psychological energy. It is a tax on all of us, and many of us have dealt with that before in a variety of forms. This is a new avatar that this is taking, right? So if and when you project calm when it happens, as best as in your possibility, right? Perfection is not the goal here. Perfection is to the wayside. To the best of your ability, acknowledge for yourself that was hard. Seek care and help for yourself. In as much as you're going to be providing it for your community members, your participants, and your students, you need it too. Our hope, of course, is that particularly for all of you who have personally been harmed through these actions by hateful individuals and hateful actors, that this is also a space where you could feel acknowledged and held, and that we respect you and we see you and we know that you are doing incredible work. And we're very, very happy to support you in that. So take care of yourselves in this. We are easy to find. There's all of our contact information. If you'd like to continue the conversation, Jade and I would be delighted to do that with you. We'll of course send out the video recording link after the session is done, and as well as the transcript for the entire closed captioning that we provided as well. It was really wonderful to see so many of your faces here today. Thank you for sharing the time with us. Take good care of yourselves, and please let us know how we can continue to support. Our next webinar session that we're building out at the moment is around anti-Asian violence, exclusion, and xenophobia, both from a historical perspective in the current moment, and how do we actually support community members who are experiencing hate and harm along that axis. So please keep your eyes out for that. Thank you again, dear friends and colleagues. Take good care. Bye.